So are you still of the opinion that North Korea will present President Obama with his one of first crisis abroad in his second term?
I don't know if it'll be the biggest problem that he'll face, but I think it may be a problem a lot quicker than most people are expecting. My reading of what's going on with the North Koreans is that early next year, they will start to become much more active. And what that means, of course, is unclear, but part of it may be some sort of new diplomatic initiative early next year designed to restart negotiations with the United States that will not be entirely to our liking, of course. And if that doesn't work, the North Koreans could then move on to tougher measures like new tests, new missile tests, new nuclear tests, that kind of activity.
And how likely is that the Obama administration will not like what North Korea has to suggest?
Well, you know, it's been my experience that North Korea never makes a public diplomatic initiative that everyone kind of loves. There's always something in it that is not going to be acceptable. So the issue will be, if they do that indeed, the issue will be, will we still engage with them to try to learn more about their thinking, about the initiative, and to see if there's any opening for moving forward. My hunch is we won't engage with them because the experience of the past 3 years from the administration's perspective has been so bad that there's very little appetite for talking to the North Koreans.
So diplomatic passivity, basically.
Yes, I think the administration has pressed the default button on its North Korea policy, and so diplomatic passivity, that's a good way of describing it, I think is their preferred operating mode. And events may kind of drag them out of that mode, but we have to wait and see.
But in your article for Foreign Policy, you do mention that that kind of approach to North Korea is very dangerous in the long term. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think it's dangerous for a number of reasons. The most obvious one that most people focus on is North Korea's weapons of mass destruction programs, and particularly its nuclear program. And while we don't know exactly what's going on, I think it's fair to say that they are gradually moving forward in developing more nuclear weapons. And the missile program also is going to gradually move forward. So, for example, one expert recently did a study that estimated that in a worst case scenario, North Korea could have 50 nuclear weapons over the next 4 years. I think that's quite a problem. Another area which I think is very important is that we don't quite focus on the fact that in 2010, when North Korea conducted its 2 provocations, the sinking of the Cheonan and the second one, the artillery attack on South Korea, at least in the second instance, there was a serious danger that the tensions could escalate to maybe even a peninsula-wide conflict. And that's certainly not something that the United States should want to see. We need to avoid that possibility. And I think others understand that, particularly in South Korea, that we need a policy that's going to avoid that kind of possible problem.
And also because if we try to not really act actively on those provocations, that means we're not really working on our pivot toward Asia, is it?
Well, you're right. I mean, dealing with North Korea should be a combination of different measures, just as our pivot to Asia is supposed to be a combination of different political, economic, and military measures. So in the case of North Korea, certainly we've been paying a lot of attention since those provocations to how do we bolster deterrence, how do we, boost our defenses against possible provocations. But an effective policy requires combining military measures and diplomatic measures. And so that's what we really need to be striving for. And on top of that, since you mentioned the pivot to Asia, the pivot to Asia to me means that Asia is more important to us. Therefore, we should be actively involved in dealing with all the security problems in Asia. Well, North Korea is a serious security problem. We can't just ignore it. And military measures alone just won't work.
Has to be military and diplomatic and just multifaceted response, you mean?
Exactly. We need a multifaceted response. It doesn't mean that diplomacy is going to work.
Right.
And that's the point of the security measures that we're taking. We take the security measures just in case diplomacy doesn't work, and we're prepared for the worst case scenarios.
Right.
That's the point here. And yet we're not taking the diplomatic measures. We're just taking the security measures.
So you also mentioned that you view the bolstering of military ties between U.S. and South Korea is insufficient. In your opinion, what's stopping the two countries from upping the ante?
Well, I think the problem of the past 3 years, there have been a couple of problems. The first problem was that South Korea's policy, at least I viewed it as very ideological. It wasn't pragmatic. And by that I mean that South Korea jettisoned all the pragmatic progress that had been made under the previous two South Korean administrations and took a much harsher, harder, ideological approach towards North Korea. The United States bought into that approach. The Obama administration, because of its close relationship with the Lee administration, bought into that approach. On top of that, you know, the North Koreans are not blameless here. Let's face it, this is a very difficult country to deal with. And so the North Koreans conducting missile and nuclear tests in 2009 when the Obama administration took office essentially made a big mistake because that really soured the administration on conducting any diplomacy with the North Koreans. And there's one other factor here that I really feel I need to mention. Let's not assume that North Korea is willing to negotiate away its nuclear program or to stop posing a periodic threat to South Korea. I have no doubt that the North Korea we are dealing with today is very different from the North Korea I dealt with when I was in the State Department in the 1990s. North Korea today is less interested in a better relationship with the United States as a guarantee of its security and more interested in weapons of mass destruction to guarantee its own security. That's just one important difference. And so that makes the situation a lot more difficult to deal with.
I find that's very interesting. Actually, that leads us to the next question, which is, it's been 6 months since Kim Jong-un came to power. Do you view him as more open-minded than his predecessors? That means his father and his grandfather, relatively speaking.
He's only been in power for 10 months. You know, so he has to deal with these enormous problems left to him by his father. And he figures he's going to be in power for years. So, you know, 10 months isn't a big window to see what someone's going to do.
How long would you wait until you
Well,
see
I'm not
something?
waiting. I mean, I don't feel I need to wait. And I think this is one of the problems with our policy, how we've dealt with North Korea. I'll give you a case in point. You know, at the beginning of the Obama administration, there were many people saying because Kim Jong-il just had a stroke, we should wait, see how that plays out. You know, I'm sure many of them were hoping North Korea would collapse and just go away. But the point is that we keep trying to fine-tune our policy too much and to key it to developments inside North Korea about which we don't really know a lot. People seem to think they know a lot, and they really don't. And so what we need to do is to think about what are our national interests here, and then think about how to secure them. It's a very simple formula, but most people aren't really focused on that.